Gunnedah, a New South Wales community, has seen an increase in demand for mental health services. Ellen Howland sits at her empty gym on the corner of Bloomfield and Chandos Streets, near where the Namoy River breached its banks the day after the 8th flood in 6 months in Gunnedah, New South Wales. What does she think about the floods? What tragedy has resulted from the floods? Let's see. To begin, let's look at Howland's concern regarding the floods. According to Howland, she is a mentality coach with a normal upbeat, and yet she is fatigued. I'm psychologically drained from changing our plans, adapting, packing for floods, cleaning up after the floods, and resetting the business, she continued. It's a familiar story in southern Australia. Flood warnings were issued for 23 rivers in Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria this week. Flash floods have decimated communities. Between January and October, more than 230,000 insurance claims, totaling more than $5.5 billion, were filed for flood-related damage, not including the latest flooding in Victoria and New South Wales. Gym sessions are a much-needed social occasion for many of Howland's clients, an excuse to travel into town, take a class, and grab a smoothie from the cafe. But Howland is concerned about the clients when their lines are disconnected or the facility is closed. It's taking its toll, she says. We're also dealing with people who have experienced some health issues. People come to us for happiness and community involvement. We're not built to survive in solitude. So when folks are kept at home, especially those with children on their farms, it's pretty difficult for them. The town's most recent evacuation order was issued on November 15th, and inhabitants implemented well-worn flood plans. Moving on, it's disaster fatigue. Murray O'Keefe is a counselor and grazier on Old Bluevale Road on the Namoy's north side, mere land yards from the river's swollen banks. His house is built on a mound. It becomes an island during floods. Acres of oats surround it, choked and soiled by floodwaters. When the paddock flooded, his cattle would turn the oats into fodder. It was supposed to be made into hay, but flooded again. So it will now be plowed in. My wife and I are extremely fortunate, O'Keefe says. We both work outside the farm. It's why he has time to talk. People whose primary source of income is cotton or canola are out doing what they can during the weather break. There's nothing like Friday afternoon, sitting in a field with 100 head of cattle and just having them talk to you, and you talk to them if you had a tough week at work, he says. O'Keefe's cattle will survive, but the loss of this field will deplete the feed reserves they have placed aside. O'Keefe remains philosophical, knowing that Gunnedah has gotten off lightly compared to locations like Yagora. When you look at what's going on in the center west, you've got to count your lucky stars, he says. People have been killed. It's a never-ending loop of frustration here, but that's all. It's aggravating. Josie Hoffman, a psychologist and Center Care New England Northwest's executive manager of therapeutic services, says it all adds up. Not just the floods, but the pandemic, fires, and drought. My concern is that calamities have had a cumulative effect, Hoffman adds. It's called disaster fatigue. Following that, lack of safety. Hoffman has noted a rise in anxiety and depression symptoms due to a mostly unpredictable society. It will have long-term impacts on individuals because there is a lack of safety and security inside their environment. And the environment is a trigger, she explains. Senecare has noticed an upsurge in mental health services, not just from those who have been flooded, but also from those who have been indirectly affected, such as family members and relief workers. Some question whether it is worthwhile to live here, but Hoffman advises individuals to work through their trauma before making any major decisions. We don't want individuals making decisions in a heightened condition because you're not always making the most educated and well-thought-out decision. Next up, they're talking about rain again. Sava Ken Lloyd is a poet, a retiree, a singer, and a raconteur. His house has been frequently flooded over the years, yet he refuses to leave. Sava's kitchen is adorned with clocks and kitchen utensils. Steph Cook, the NSW Emergency Services Minister, stood with him in his home last weekend on the floor that had lowered 10 centimeters due to flooding. Lloyd has been staying with a friend, Val, but he returns to his house as frequently as possible and avoids the flooded garden. I have to admit, I'm getting extremely fatigued, he admits. I told Val I'd want to come back this weekend, and she said, you know, they're talking about rain again. But I'm beginning to miss the town. Lloyd claims he has sought government assistance but is ineligible for emergency housing, although his home is nearly untenable and under continual threat. You must live under the bridge before we can help you, they said. Moving on, climate change can impact all sectors. Climate change experts believe this adaptation is essential for building resilience. Lauren Rickards is the co-director of RMIT University's Climate Change Transformations Research Program in Melbourne. She stated that climate change has the potential to affect all sectors of regional Australian economies, and communities, including agriculture, tourism, health, and population sizes. We know climate variability is becoming more extreme, Professor Rickards said. Look at the ongoing flooding, not to mention the Black Summer fires. When you combine that and rising temperatures, the flow-on effects are becoming so severe that we're struggling to keep up with them. While cities are not immune to climate change, especially with coastal erosion and more powerful storms, it can widen the socio-cultural divide between regional areas and towns. According to Professor Rickards, adapting to climate change entails addressing the immediate challenges of greenhouse gas emissions and other inequalities, such as access to services and reliable infrastructure. In many ways, regional areas have an advantage because they have capabilities, skills, motivation, and social relationships that cities can only dream of, she said. At the same time, things like the ability to rebuild promptly, the ability to access the kinds of health services that you might require, existing inequalities can be exacerbated. Following that, how communities are changing. Communities in regions across regional Australia are banding together to change how things are done. At the municipal level, the Townsville City Council has argued for stronger council powers to halt some developments in high-risk flood zones. In contrast, the Gladstone Regional Council has just released a roadmap with the next economy to help guide that region's economic transition. Both of these councils collaborate to help guide that region's transition. Under the aegis of the Local Government Association of Queensland, there's also a Climate Resilient Councils organization. This organization aids municipalities in planning for and responding to the opportunities and challenges posed by climate change. According to Professor Rickards, leadership must emerge from rural and regional communities. She said, without a question, the local government must be involved, and some amazing leadership is emerging there. At the same time, they've had a lot on their plate, including picking up the pieces after one climate-related calamity after another. According to Professor Rickards, various community organizations, the commercial sector, and state and federal governments all had key roles to play in the issue. She closed by saying that planning for the effects of climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions might provide huge opportunities for local communities. Benefits upon benefits in terms of new industries, innovations, new talents, capacities, and families relocating to rural and regional areas, she said. Benefits on top of perks. Next up, flourishing in the floods. When rivers flood, the torrent of nutrients causes a boom in the food chain, from algae and plants to insects and other invertebrates. Frogs, fish, turtles, and birds. Water birds in particular thrive in floods. They swarm, feast, and reproduce. River ecologist Richard Kingsford says it's a welcome boost for their dwindling numbers. It's at times like this we get these phenomenal colonies of water birds, which are the flagship for what's going on, Professor Kingsford says. It's that vast expanse, that smorgasbord of food out there that caters to every different species. It's incredible, especially in the Murray-Darling, because all the rivers are flooded. River red gum trees receive the water they require, and underground aquifers are recharged in preparation for dry periods. It keeps the health of the entire river system going for probably years, if not decades, Professor Kingsford says. Finally, the dugong population devastated. It's an entirely different tale for dugongs living in the waters off Queensland's southeast coast. These massive marine mammals have been washing up sick or dead along the Fraser Coast due to silt wash downstream through the flooded inland river system and out to sea, killing most of the seagrass on which they rely for food. We've seen a massive increase in the number of strandings, says Kathy Townsend, an animal ecologist. We've seen 10 times the numbers we saw in 2019, so starvation is a problem. A wide variety of animals require seagrass, not just dugongs. Scientists are also investigating whether the increased number of green sea turtles washing up sick with soft shell disease is related to flooding. Australia is a land of booms and busts. It has been that way for centuries, Associate Professor Townsend says. However, when you put enough pressure on it, it goes over the other side of that tipping point, and that's what we're seeing with seagrasses in these flood events. Well, that marks the end of our video for today. We hope you enjoyed it. On your way out, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and thanks for watching.